Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Maria Brito to discuss how creativity rules the world, the art and business of turning your ideas into gold, published by our friends at HarperCollins. Maria Brito is a New York-based contemporary art advisor, author, and curator. She is a Harvard Law School graduate, originally from Venezuela. Brito was selected by Complex Magazine as one of the 20 power players in the art world, and she was named by Art News as one of the innovators who gets to shape the art world. Maria has curated art exhibitions in 3 continents and also created and hosted the C Files with Maria Brito, a TV and streaming series for PBS's station All Arts. For several years, Maria has taught variations of her creativity class to many and has also designed and launched Jumpstart, a comprehensive online program on creativity for artists, freelancers, managers, and entrepreneurs. She's ready to help you take the power of your ideas to the next level. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by an old friend of Books and Books, Carlos Betancourt, an American artist who has resided in Miami for several decades. His artwork explores issues of memory and his own experiences, while also dwelling in themes of nature, the environment, and matters of beauty, identity, and communication. His artwork is part of public collections such as the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and many, many others. In October 2015, the beautiful monograph of his work, Carlos Betancourt in Perfect Utopia, was published by Rizzoli. Just a quick reminder that throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. And please order your copy of How Creativity Rules the World from Books and Books Below if you haven't already. And thank you for supporting indie bookstores. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hello, how are you? How's everybody?
Oh,
Thank you, Christina, for the introduction. And thank you, Carlos, for being with me here tonight. I think that it's both you and Books and Books are iconic Florida, Miami residents. And I'm just super happy that we can do this virtually. And, I would love to be in Miami tonight, but at least we can do this. And I think that technology deserves a little applause, even though everybody's tired of those things, because it allows us to be together and see our faces and, hang out and share what the things that we think with a community of great people.
Thank you, Maria, for those kind words. And Christina, thank you for your introduction. And thanks to Books and Books in Miami and South Florida for this event. We love Books and Books. And thank you all for joining us today in this chat. I'm honored to have a chance to ask Maria Brito a couple of questions today on her inspiring new book. Maria and I have been friends for a while. I consider her quite brilliant, borderline genius, like I like to say, through the years. She's a very inspiring person. And if you don't know that yet, you will discover it once you read this book. Above all, I admire her commitment and respect towards artists and the creative process, and her infinite passion for art, Maria. She's also a very dedicated and wonderful familia person. Love your family. Besos a todos. Maria is quite a visionary. Congratulations, Maria. Big time. Your book is a jewel. It is refreshing and very respectful of the power of art and the mysterious and the not so mysterious forces of creativity, which you wrote about. For me, it reads like a historical novel on creativity, captivating me page by page, Maria. It is also a personal narrative while being loaded with enlightenment and inspiration for anyone. I find myself quoting you for the last couple of weeks. I think I call you every day and go, "Oh, Maria, you really wrote this next time." I'm fascinated by the deep dive into history, culture, psychology, science, and how you analyze the greatest minds of the last 600 years in this book. Maria is in New York. I'm in Miami, I think, right? You're in New York. I'm in Miami.
I am in New York. I am in New York.
Maria, as a first question, and again, it's an honor to be here with you. I feel you, and I love your mind.
The honor is mine. Yes.
Why did you decide to write a book about creativity?
This is a very important time in history for all of us who are populating this earth, because we're facing a lot of changes and shifts and moments. And yes, the unfortunate or fortunate word is unprecedented, right? And so pandemics and wars and political changes, societal changes, there is an avalanche of technology, social media, things that are constantly popping up in our worlds that we have to adapt and adopt if we want to keep ourselves relevant. And I've always been fascinated by the thought that someone with their ideas can change the world, can make money, can impact others, can build empires, can leave things for posterity, whether it is a film or a piece of art or a book or an invention like the iPhone or the electrical car and things like that. And I had an opportunity to also, as you know, change careers. And I was a very miserable corporate attorney 13 years ago. And I wanted to bring to the world the ideas of these incredible visionaries and artists, and also my own evolution, and show the world that you can also turn your ideas into gold, that you can also do meaningful things. Because at the end of the day, what being creative is bringing your own ideas of value that are relevant and that can be materialized, right? Because if I am creative, but everything is in my head and I don't have anything, or I don't have a willingness to put it out, it's just going to stay there, right? It's like a movie that is playing in my head constantly, but never materialized. So I wanted to bring a guide so people could actually think that they also can bring these ideas to the world, that creativity, although it is the lifeblood of artistry, it does not belong to artists alone. It belongs to anybody who's willing to take it. If you are an accountant, if you're a dentist, if you are an engineer, whatever it is, creativity can and has so many different branches, because everything is the way that you position yourself and your business, is the way that you express your ideas, is the way that you see things and opportunities. And this is the time to actually have human beings express those ideas and capitalize from them as well.
And all along, I thought that it was all divine intervention and it belonged only to artists. But we'll get into that a little bit later. You mentioned, thank you for that answer, actually. You mentioned about you being a lawyer. I remember reading in one of the chapters when it becomes a very personal narrative about your experience growing up in Venezuela and not being able to go back to Venezuela, becoming a lawyer when actually you were a creative type from very early on. You went to Venice, to Florence when you were 15, yeah. I believe, and that had a huge impact on you. And then eventually You became a Harvard graduate, a lawyer, very successful lawyer. Talk to us a little bit about how do you transition and why from a lawyer to an inspiring art consultant, and also a little bit about your grandfather that you love so much, and Enrique, I believe his name in chapter one, chapter 2.
Chapter 1.
Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yes, I mean, I am going to start answering by the last question. So my grandfather,
I'll remind you.
No, yeah, my grandfather was kind of the inspiration or the original muse for me to start writing the book. And my grandfather has been dead for 18 years now. And he was a very creative man, but I didn't really know that what it meant because I was a little girl, right? And so I wasn't that into what is creativity or anything, but my grandfather had been born in Venezuela, and he was the child of Lebanese immigrants. And he grew up in a coastal city far from Caracas with his 9 siblings. And he was very smart. And it was a time where, you were homeschooled, and then you went to school with other kids and whatnot. And then he went to medical school, and he moved to Caracas when he was 18 or 17. And he was, summa cum laude, the best of his class. He became an OBGYN. He went to study in Paris. He came back. He met my grandmother, married, had his family. He was the director of the Red Cross. And then he suffered an accident, and it wasn't anything super dramatic, but his hands were not the same. And he said, okay, look, I am not going to be the best doctor that I can ever be. So I'm going to, unfortunately, retire from a career that I love. And he said, well, what can I do next? And his family, Lebanese, they had opened a bank, and the bank was obviously successful. And he said, can I work here? And they said, of course you can work here. Come. And so they gave him a job, and within 3 years, he became one of the top 3 guys in the bank. And then he was kidnapped by the guerrilla. So these people were trained by Fidel Castro. They were sent to Venezuela. It was, the 70s, the early 70s. This was happening everywhere in South America, but Venezuela was a very important place for, and still is, by the way, for Cuba to take everything away, right? But they send all these guerrilleros, right? And also they trained the Venezuelan ones. And so my grandfather, being a high-profile 40-something guy who, had money and a nice life, they kidnapped him because it was a big signal for the government, right? I mean, it was like, listen, the guerrilleros said we're here to stay. And so he spent a month in a rainforest without knowing if he was going to survive or not. He had a straitjacket that he slept with and he lived with for a month. He had duct tape around his eyes, and the only thing he could do was to send 5 letters as a proof of life to my grandmother. And he just didn't know if he was going to make it.
And I remember that in the story you write that that many of these things you have forgotten, and during COVID, as you were kind of like rejecting your very successful career, you wanted further inspiration. You wanted to be more creative, and you decided to Google your grandfather to see there was something in him that triggered so much in you to actually.
It's unexplainable, because what happened is that during COVID, the very, very beginning, it was May. So we're a month and a half into this mess that we don't know. We are not seeing people. New York was extraordinarily serious about it. So everything is like locked, shut down and whatnot. And I'm actually being very introspective, but I'm also feeling like, oh my God, look how fast we have been living, all the things that I was doing, and not really like having time to get a sip of water because it's always running. And I started feeling nostalgic of Caracas, because I haven't been there in so long. And I thought about him. And I Googled his name for no reason. I mean, this guy has been dead, at that time, 16 years. He had no relationship to the internet, very little. I mean, he knew, he saw things on computers, but it's not that he was like leaving Facebook pages or anything. And then I find this video that Reuters had in an archive of the day that he got released from his kidnapping. And I had never seen that in my life. And nobody in my family had seen it, Carlos, because nobody Googled his name. My mother did. I mean, my grandmother is dead. Other aunts, uncles, some of them are dead, some alive, but like my mother never did such thing, and she was like the closest with him. And I just went ahead and Googled it because he just came to my mind. And when
this trigger an aha moment, again, creativity in some unconscious way that you were ready for a new direction, new project.
I wanted to write a book, and I thought about him, and I thought how creative he was and how inspiring he was, because he was an artist on the weekends. He left after the ransom was paid, he was left with no money, nothing. He had to ask for a loan so that he could buy a business that was a printing company, because he didn't want to go back to the bank. And, they went from being really well off to like having to sort of like live from scratch, right? And build things from scratch. And he never complained. He was always finding solutions for everything, business solution, medical solutions. And so this guy is like, for me, my grandfather is the embodiment of a Renaissance man. And a Renaissance man, I have spoken and wrote about it in the book, right? In the book a lot. Is like that person who's willing to really, really mine their ideas, ask questions, go for them, check everything, lift every lid, pick up the phone a million times if needed be, like Leonardo da Vinci was, right? Like there is a line that I wrote in the book that when Leonardo is the guy who never took yes for an answer, because he said like, okay, yes. And he's like, okay, but I need to know one more thing, and I need to write it down in my notebook, and I need to test it. And so that is what really being creative is about, is digging, is looking, is wanting to experiment. The whole thing, Carlos, there's no such thing as a 25-year career anymore, right? Gen Z and millennials are going to have 20 careers. Because like they just can't, people can't have just one thing in their lives anymore. Perhaps if you're an artist, you are more committed to that than someone who's working in tech, or someone who's working in, finance or whatever, because the times ask for that. And so this is an important thing for people to actually honor that. You don't have to be doing the same thing that you went to college for. You don't have to stay in a job that you hate. In fact, I encourage people to go for entrepreneurial ideas and to really, because I think the parallels between entrepreneurs and artists are just vast. In fact, I consider artists entrepreneurs, because you live off of your ideas that you're able to sell. Right. And so that's what Elon Musk does. And that's what Steve Jobs did, is like incredible ideas that you're able to materialize and sell.
I'm going to read. So for those of you that don't have the book with you yet, I'm going to read some of the names of the chapters in your book, which for me, they're quite engaging, and it shows the research that goes into it. One of the chapters is called Creativity and the Artist, A Brief History. Bringing the inside out, creativity and authenticity. Taking the outside in, creativity and empathy. Intuition. Your guts know what your mind doesn't. Look, I get goosebumps. Mixing intuition and rationality, balancing premonition and logic. When I read this and many of the other chapters I wanted to list here, I feel you as an artist. You were able to get into the mind of the artist. And in one of the artists, I'm sorry, one of the artists, in one of the chapters, let me see this note that I have here. In one of the early chapters, you brilliantly write about your experience reading Homer, the Iliad, when you were very young, and how the idea of the muse or muses fascinated you. Creativity as being something divine. I grew up like that as well. Part of it still is in my world. Only a few can be creative, that. And I'm reading from your book. One of the most dangerous myths perpetuated for centuries is that creativity comes on its own, without any effort on our part, in a sudden flash of insight, or with some capricious Greek muse, we love Greece, don't we, shows up unexpectedly to inspire. We may still call on the muses sometimes, but we know now that creativity lives inside each one of us, and in order to express it to the fullest, we must work at it. What leads to those aha moments is doing the work and being sufficiently attuned to recognize our intuitive flashes as creative pieces of a bigger puzzle. You conclude that we still need to call the muses at times, but that creativity can be mostly activated by exercising it. Can you expand a little bit on that? I find this fascinating, all this research. And
well, the thing is that people think I'm not creative because I wasn't born with that gene. Oh, I'm not an artist, so I'm not creative. No. And oh no, don't ask me, I'm not the creative one. First of all, we're all born creative. I have this study in the book that measure the creativity in children and follow these kids until they were older. And when they were older, they were not creative anymore. The same kids who scored at the highest level of creativity, when they were 30, they scored at the 2%. So
that was a fascinating chapter.
It's a problem. It's a problem with society, formal education. When people tell you this is the way things are done, question that. That's a very important thing, unless it's illegal or against the laws of nature, there's nothing that prevents people from not trying a good idea, right? And so creativity is action. If I am all day long sitting down just waiting for the muse to show up, it probably won't, because that's not how our brains activate the ideas, right? Like, I mean, an artist like you have to go to the studio, you have to experiment with materials, you have to play with, ideas, you have to look at your computer, you're always inventing something, you're, doing sculptures and collages and prints. And like, it's not that you're like, oh, let me just sit in my terrace with a glass of wine and wait for things to happen. It's true, however, that we all need some time in silence alone. It's also true that we need downtime. But it's not true that creativity just happens to people, right? And I also mentioned the example of Picasso, because this was a guy who only wanted to work. I mean, Picasso was not Picasso by chance. And I think that people have to know that. Picasso was a guy who was not only planning, which, there is a whole chapter on like how writing things by hand stimulates creativity. And he had 69 notebooks in his lifetime, which were, they were shown to the world after his death. And he was making a painting a day. And it was, or more sometimes, and sketches and things. And like, he wanted it. He wanted it, right? I mean, it's not like, oh, let me just take a nap and then maybe tomorrow. No, I mean, creativity is action. If you go to, or if you ask anybody, like, I mean, I talk about Elon Musk quite a bit because he is right now both an incredible man and a troll, and also misunderstood like most geniuses. But when they gave him the cover of Time magazine like 2 or 3 months ago, Man of the Year, he got a lot of tweets saying, you're so, oh my God, you're lucky. He said, well, if you call working 16 hours a day lucky, then yes, I am very lucky. I mean, it's like creativity, ideas, all this influx of things happen when people actually decide to move the wheel and take action. And that is absolutely important, just as it is having a certain routine established in your life.
You use a very, very wise reference. You talk about Michelangelo, how he had decided to have vision. You use that a lot. Visualization, how he had decided that he was going to be the greatest artist that ever lived. A big, large vision. He didn't know how to paint well enough. It was a great sculpture, and when he was commissioned the Sistine Chapel, he went all for it, even though he was terrified of painting. But he knew that he could feel the result of taking such a risk. I love how you also put Thomas Alva Edison,
Yes.
Monk Pierre Perignon of the Champagne fame, and Braque all in the same page, and how they all had a large vision, each one in their different field, and how they fulfilled their vision, and how we drink Perignon because this guy so wanted to perfect his champagne. I have another question for you. Sometimes I think that art could be as simple as picking up seashells, no?
Yeah.
Or life could be as simple as a stroll down the beach and picking up seashells. Why should we be creative, or why is creativity important? Why should it be manifested?
Without creativity, there's no progress. And that's it, the end of it. Because everything that we have, from the computer that you and I are looking at each other, to, the books and movies that moves us, and Netflix and whatever, it all started with one idea. People forget that Apple was a startup out of a garage, right? And it always sounds cliche, and people say, but I'm not Apple and I'm not Steve Jobs. None of us are. There's only one Steve Jobs, one Carlos Betancourt, one Maria Brito. There is only one of each of us, right? And so what is it that you're going to bring? What is going to be the thing? What is in your head that hasn't been brought out, right? Is it a novel? Is it a business? Is it a charity? The book is really very geared towards making money, and that's the truth. I live in New York City, man. I have to pay for this. It's very expensive. So what I'm saying is the thing is, I don't think creativity and money should be separated. I think you have to get paid, all of you, for your great ideas. And that is very important, right? But I also think that people will make mistakes, and failures are very important for creativity. There's a whole chapter on failures. There is a whole idea that it's not me who failed, it's an idea, it's a project, right? So people have to separate themselves, because that is the nature of being an artist too, right? And it's the nature of being an entrepreneur, is that some experiments are going to take off and some experiments are just going to be flops. And so I think that creativity is really the most crucial skill that anybody can possess outside of your world of artists, which you are an entrepreneur and you're on your own and autonomous. I also mentioned the data at the beginning, which is LinkedIn, for example, that has, 800 million professionals exchanging data all day long in messages and posts of jobs and things like that. For 3 years in a row, they, scanning all that data, have come up with, very strong conclusions that the number one skill that everybody is looking for is creativity in any business. And that also is the hardest one to find. And why is that gap? This is what I ask myself. How is it possible that people have lost that inner child? The one that is always asking the questions, the one that is actually looking at the intersections. Things are very, very important. If you go with the mainstream, you're not really going to find gold. You have to be willing to explore those niches. You have to be willing to explore margins. You have to be willing to explore intersections and frontiers and things like that. And I promise you, there are millions of dollars in amazing ideas if only you want to be able to pay attention and to explore and to keep asking questions rather than going with emotions and taking things at face value. I don't think you pay at face value, and you don't either. So
I have a great follow-up questions for that, because about commerce and artists could be such a cliche. But before I do that, I took the time to write some of my favorite quotes from the book, and they're huge. I'm just going to read like 3 of them.
Okay.
Oh, Maria. Okay, so some of my favorite quotes. You don't have to suffer to become creative. But if you find yourself in the middle of a crisis, know that it could be a catalyst for progress and originality. And you talk about Guernica here from Picasso. Another one-liner, art was being created before the idea or the word creativity existed. That makes me ponder so much about how endemic to be creative is. That's why it's so important to consider, why is it that we must be creative, no? I love when you say the way forward, creativity like a wheel.
Yes.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Being creative and being talented are 2 different things.
That's
And one of my favorite, very important for us to know that in you. One of my favorite sentences, every creative leader possesses autonomy, which is the quality of being self-governing, self-directing, and independent. I think that's really wise for those that want to activate their creativity. Also make me think why in so many radical governments or dictatorships, they are terrified of creativity, and it's because they rob people of their individuality, of their autonomy. But I wanted to go back to the idea of commerce and the artist. As an artist, I consider my studio and the creative space sacred, to use a better word. I protect the space mentally and physically so as to have clarity and, in my case, spirituality. Commerce is something that usually comes after I finish a work of art, not while I'm working at it. In this book, you speak about artists that also look at commerce as art. Why is it so important? I think you dwell on it too, but maybe in a poetic way, in a one sentence. There are many ways of defining that, but I'll leave it to you.
I think that, for the most part, the majority, here's the thing. I want to end forever the myth of the starving artist. That is something that bugs me. It does not help artists, and it's not true, dude. I mean, like, seriously, artists are really rich. I see these young kids graduating from school and selling paintings for $100,000 2 years later, right? I mean, it's all about how you communicate. And I think that the point that I want to make is not that you're doing things just thinking about money. It's more that I believe that if you do have excellent ideas that are out in the world, that are creative, that are a piece of art or a business or an invention or a product, you have to be compensated for that, because that is the currency, and it's not new. It's, as I demonstrate in the book, since recorded history, and that the time that we have post-Renaissance, which is so important, people get paid for their ideas, right? And so the creative starving artists and things, that's bullshit. And I really don't want to hear that anymore, because it is not true and it is not fair. It's not fair to artists. So, there are many ways, like you said, of being an artist, right? There is an Andy Warhol who had a party at his studio, and he had a factory, and he had 1 million people, and he had them naked, and he had them clothed, and he threw parties, and he fell on this, right? Like, I mean, Andy Warhol was not rich. He was the child of immigrants, moved to New York, had very little money, and started building up from there. And so it's a fascinating story, because he was the one who started playing with how to multiply the same image, right, 1 million times. So he was already a factory in his own head. Right? He was doing what nobody else was doing.
He was already a factory. I never heard that before. That's a very good analogy.
He was already a factory in his own right. And you have guys like
Picasso, one of the most prolific artists, like you mentioned in the book, with a body of work large enough. I think I'm gonna go into one. I don't know the time. Yeah, maybe one of the last questions.
Yeah.
I'll make it a 2-part, so you can give us more of you, or your mind. let me go here. I think that creativity in general helps to give meaning to one's life, and it helps fulfill life in general. You talk a little bit about Braque and that moment when he created the modern collage. I remember reading about that in a book on the birth of modernism. I'll never forget that those little sparks moment. And like you said, he worked very hard to have that little moment. What are some of the things that people can do, like Braque did, to become creative?
I think that you have to, in this era where we are so inundated by news, social media, noise, it's visual pollution as well. So many things are happening. I think people have to start paying attention more to what's happening in their surroundings. And this is what I said before about what is happening in the periphery, right? It's not that hard to spot trends that can become something important. The thing is, you have to get there first, because otherwise it's just way too saturated. And so that's how hip hop started, right? It was a house party in the Bronx. People were DJing and emceeing, right? And so this was in the 70s, and nobody really knew where it was going to go. And so hip hop has been commercialized to the nth degree, but somebody was paying attention. The first people who went there was, their record labels were paying attention. And it was this Jewish woman whose name I forgot right now, who went in the Bronx. It's like, this thing has meaning. This people who are speaking words, rapping about social justice, about New York, about the experience of growing up Latino or Black. This has meaning, right? By the same token, think about how social media blew up, right? Facebook was a project of a college guy who wanted to put pictures of pretty people, right? And like pretty girls, and rate them. So what is it that you are paying attention to? Is just the feed that you're receiving on your phone that has been curated for you because it follows you with algorithms and whatever? Or are you also paying attention to opportunities, and this is applicable for everybody and anybody. There are investors on Wall Street that actually put money and millions of dollars on companies because they go on the streets, they go in stores, they are like, what are people wearing? What are people drinking? When you start seeing patterns that are unusual to you, take notes of those things. Those are very important things to not only incorporate in your practice as an artist or as a business person, but also for you, because your brain makes associations. Creativity is all about making associations and bringing this old and new. Another thing that people can do is, can you think about any product or any service or anything that you can make better, that you can upgrade? If you are committed, if you're an entrepreneur, can you think about something you're like, dude, but I can make this so much better? That's what happened to me when I became an advisor. I was like, these people suck at what they do. I can do this so much better. It's true.
In the case of visual artists like me, where we flourish when we find our voice, when we own our own uniqueness, our individuality. Is fascinating to hear the angle for creativity in general. How could it be applied? For me, these things that you said, they're triggers. I usually filter them through my own personal life, or the things that touch me, that are endemic to me, that are primitive to my heart and soul. And what's outside guides me. That's a beautiful chapter that you said, taking the outside in, creativity and empathy, or bringing the inside out, creativity and authenticity. I think at the end, the word authenticity, and when you're honest with your work, like you so clearly mentioned in this book, that's success.
It's also true. I mean, but how, you are not in a bubble, right? When you put your things, like, art doesn't happen in a vacuum, no matter how sacred it is. It all comes from what's outside and inside, right? But when you do your things where you bring memories of your upbringing, things that you found in Greece, the trip that you did to Europe, the whatever, memory that you have on the beach growing up. They also intersections of things like Latino culture didn't become mainstream until like recently, right? I mean,
Right.
and we've talked about these things, how these things inspire and bring.
Like your grandfather, your own personal story of your grandfather trigger you to write this book. How more personal is
Yeah.
that? I love that chapter, taking the outside in and bringing the inside out. I think it's so clear. I think you're quite brilliant, and I think what you bring into the table is a great dialogue. I know a lot of people are talking about this book, and they're very happy that it's fresh. It reminds me a little bit when I first read Robert Ferris Thompson, Flash of the Spirits. These are really important historical research that trigger fascinating things into the future. So
it makes my
bravo.
heart think to think that I can be compared to that book. So
Oh,
I just hope that, people know that it's highly, highly actionable, that at the end of each chapter, there are all these prompts, question exercises so that you can make the book alive. This is important for people to know. This is a book made for 2022 and 2042 because it has things that only you can answer. And that's what I want people to do. And that's my sincere wish, is that you can turn these pages into parts of your life and keep coming back when you feel stuck, when you feel tired, because this consistent introspection, the honesty of your answers that you don't have to tell anybody, these are going to be written in a notebook, is what's going to allow you to come up with your ideas that you want to turn into gold, or at least into a meaningful and happy life for you, because nobody
wow.
wants to be in a miserable job. I think Christina wants to come to ask questions.
Gracias. That was so well said. Thanks.
I do. So there are a few questions out here. Let's see. There's one for both of you from Elizabeth. Carlos, your work is beautiful. And Maria, you are brilliant. I'm curious how you two met and became such good friends. I'd also love to know how both of your friends influence your work. So I guess she's asking how your friends influence your work. Yes.
All right. Well, so I met Carlos at a party in Miami at the Bass Museum that was hosted by our common friend, Walter Otero, who works with Carlos as a gallerist. And, we hit it off. Carlos is a person with an enormous amount of charisma. And he came to me and he said, I love what you're wearing, or I think I had a cuff, a colorful cuff or something.
Oh, yes. I remember.
And we sort of like became BFFs, right? And then we connected on Facebook, and then, we stayed in touch. And one summer we reunited in Greece, and it was like the best thing that, could have happened. And
we were going to meet at the bus. We were going to meet in Greece, in Miami, or in New York. It's meant to be. And then you introduced me to Dio Horia when you curated that show with who did your book, Jeffrey Deitch. That
wrote the intro, but it was the year before that I told you to go, and you went because it's so hard to find. And then you told me, oh my God, I went to that place. It's such a dream. I can't believe this exists in Mykonos, And the next year is that we actually celebrated the opening of the Greek Gotham show there. But, you have brought enormous life into my life and that of my family. You are very loved in this house. You're incredibly passionate about what you do, and sweet, and very brilliant, very smart, very well read. I love your perspective, that you're open to everything and willing to share what you know. And Carlos is really everybody's best friend because man, you really are incredible. You're very, very giving and very generous and very loving.
enough about me, please, por favor, no más. Thank you. That's very beautiful. Thank you. I think, like you said, when we met, some people are meant to go in life journey with particular friends, and I'm honored to go through this journey with you. And I of course knew that at one moment you're written some other material, but a book like this I could feel it around. I love the long hours analyzing the world, and also the long hours dancing with a cocktail in our hand. We're so blessed and grateful for those moments as well, and that we discovered this place. So you sent me that book on Mykonos, on the
yes, the liminal. Yes, I know.
liminal space, liminal. Even that you know about the word liminal, and I'm like, oh, is there something she doesn't know? So and someone asked there. I think Cristina posted a question from Cristina about friends and how they inspired. I think Maria talks about that in the book. There's constant triggers and sign outside. She has a chapter about intuition and paying attention to those things that are around, knocking in your door. Look at me, a flower, a friend. Maria herself is, in a way, responsible for one of the best relationships I have with my art dealer in Greece. So, almost every conversation that comes around, wow, I'm thirsty too. Oh my God.
No.
Friends, I have my muses. Some of you know my work, and some of you know the people that I hang around with, and they're around me constantly. Because there are muses as well. Like Maria says, sometimes you have to call them in. So it's all relevant, and it's all played for me as well. Another question, otra pregunta, Cristina?
And you forgot to say how handsome he is too.
Oh my God, are you kidding me? I don't understand how. Like he looks at himself in the mirror of Dorian Gray every day. It's just younger and younger.
He's just kind of unforgettable when you meet him.
Come on.
And truly, come on, take the praise. You deserve it. There's something very spiritual energy that you exude.
Oh, thank you. I'm very grateful, and I am spiritual indeed. I appreciate that. I'm grateful. I believe in a force much larger than me, and that has helped me all through the journeys, the ups and downs. Like a lot of other people, I am just one more going through this great experience called life.
Thank you. So here's a question from Maria. When you said you saw a void in the art advisor world, what did you see was lacking in terms of what art advisors weren't seeing for their clients yet?
Oh.
Okay, so this was 13 years ago. And I was paying attention, and I saw certain people with like some level of success, and they were very transactional. So there was not a lot of education that the art advisor was providing to the client. It was just like, okay, you buy this, I get paid, next, and repeat. There was not a lot of curation either in people's homes or spaces and things like that. So it was like, I do one thing and that only thing. And so I saw the opportunity of the education, but I took it to the next level, because at that time, the only things in social media that existed were Facebook and Twitter. And there were very rustic blog platforms, like the one that I had at the time. It was Blogger. And I said, none of these people are blogging about artists. They're not blogging about shows. They're not blogging. They are not tweeting. They are not doing anything. And I wonder why they are missing out, because, I was 32 or 33 at the time. It's not that I was so young, right? But I was like, this is an area that these people are missing out. And remember, I went to law school, so the only thing that I really knew how to do was to write, honestly. And so I said, I'm going to demystify. That became my thing. Instead of what these art advisors were doing is like, oh my God, I'm so exclusive, and I only work with like Fulanita and Menganita with all these names, ridiculous names that nobody gives a fuck, honestly. I was like, oh my God, no. The art world is going to be with Maria Brito for everybody. And so I had this philosophy, and that I made it demystifying the art world. And so I started writing in my very ugly blog and posting my own pictures, that were crappy, super crappy. I had a camera because the iPhone camera at that time was nothing like it is today. So I had a real camera. And so I took it then to the next level. I said, okay, this is great. I started, I had my assistant, who's still my assistant, was like, okay, let's just offer this to Huffington Post. And they say yes. And then Forbes came and asked, can you do one for us? And then it was Elle. And then I was like, okay, so this is if people are asking for this, it's because people don't know about it. People are intimidated. And, writing those articles, clients came to me because it was like, finally, someone writes about the art world in plain English. It doesn't have to be like Art Forum at the time where you needed to, you could not read more than one sentence because it was absurd, right? Like what Art Forum, that was the respected, magazine at the time, nobody understood. And so that was something that I took so seriously, the opening up of the art world, especially living in New York City, because, the audiences were everywhere. And sometimes they didn't have access to the artist studio. Sometimes they didn't have access to the shows. And sometimes they just wanted to know what was the difference between a print and a one of a kind without being ashamed, to ask someone, in a gallery, like, what's the difference? And so this was an incredibly important part of my business. And it continues to be because, that's how I did my TV show. I was like, I'm curious. Now I'm going to play with video. And so it's always like asking the next question. And I never say, if I have an idea and I think I can put it out in the world, I never self-censor myself. I said, okay, I'm going to explore the next thing. As long as it is aligned with my mission and what I do, there's no reason why to say no. I've done product collaborations, I've curated shows. I never say no to things if they fulfill my creative curiosity. So that was what was happening. Now everybody's an art advisor. Now everybody's on Instagram, but I can put my hands on fire. I was the first one to do this blog post inside of Artist Studio. I was the first one to be with them, write about them, syndicate the content to, I remember when I wrote about Carlos Studio and it went in the Huffington Post, and it was such a hit. I remember interviewing David LaChapelle, his last show with Paul Kazman. And I interviewed, and David is an icon. It's like a gay icon. People love him. Trans, and I did the video with him, and it was so shitty that the voice and the image were not synchronized. Seriously, and we put it out, and we had so many hits, and we put it on YouTube with my friend Peter, who has also been a business kind of like a content partner of mine for so long. And I didn't care; it wasn't perfect, but I knew that the intent was there, which was, let me show David's fans who maybe are in North Dakota and maybe they are never going to be able to come and see David in person, what David is thinking about. So that, my friends, has been a very important part of my journey.
And it's a lot of this is in the book, and I enjoy reading it on my pace so well. So refreshing to hear you talking about it like this. Thank you. That was a great question.
That was a great question. So you have to be a risk taker a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
Is there an element of that involved?
Absolutely. I mean, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And that's also a subtitle in the book, because the fastest way to kill your creativity and your business really is to stay in a comfort zone, right? Because we have to be always willing, and again, like I said before, to adopt and adapt, because you have to meet the world where it is. I didn't write this in the book, but I'm pretty sure you guys remember the birth of Instagram was, I think, 11 years ago. And a lot of galleries said that we're not going to join that. It's ridiculous, right? Well, guess what? Today, Instagram accounts for 25% of all the art sales in the world. Not with a click, but people exchanging messages on the background, save this for me and whatever, right? It was also, Instagram was something that fashion houses, big fashion houses like Hermes, they were like, we're never going to be there. you know, the amount of things that they lost for not being there for 3 or 4 years. You know what I mean? And I'm not like, sometimes it's hard to be an early adopter of everything, especially in a world where like now there's TikTok and there's YouTube and it's too many things. But those are risks, and they are small in comparison if you think about it, right? Like adopting a new technology doesn't have to mean you're going to get an ulcer, right? I mean, it's like you have to be wanting to do something fun that is also enlarging and expanding. And so calculated risks is what I recommend, right? Like you're not going to just bet your mom and take all the money and put it in a venture that you don't know how it's going to play out. But you do have to kind of move an inch towards that thing that makes you uncomfortable. If I actually recommend this in the book, if you're a person who just writes email and never picks up the phone, go and pick up the phone for once, right? Those are little things that move you forward towards completion of goals. Momentum is very important. Once you start taking actions that take you out of your comfort zone, you start seeing results, and that's very important.
Thank you. So here's a question from Noelle. She says, thank you both so much. What advice would both of you give to a young artist coming up?
I will say, from the creative point, do and create that's in your mind, that is for you and no one else, that needs to exist, that you have such a force inside of you that nothing can stop you. You just need to make it tangible. It needs to exist. And that takes you to a place. There's these triggers in the minds of the artist. Sometimes they could appear to be so selfish that they're just self-gratifying to see these things that exist. But then, as I get older, I realize that these things were meant to exist, that they have continuity, that they're going to add to the past and to the future. Sometimes you leave it there for someone else to continue. Maria talks about this in the book. So yeah, don't go there. As abstract as this idea feels, if it has an engine in your head, this must exist, go for it. With the hardship like Maria talked, or not. But if you feel that force, make it happen.
Well, that's an incredible advice. And that's part of really what it is being creative, right? It's expressing your ideas in ways that are just you, and that nobody else can emulate. And I honestly think that I just really want to reinforce that we as a society have to move far, far away from the starving artist myth. It's needed. It's needed and necessary. I actually think that because of the way that artists think and see things, they will start having more important roles. And I know that there are companies that are looking for artists to put them on the board of directors because they need people who can see things from a different point of view. Artists have been called prescient, that they can see the future because they are so intuitive and attuned to the world. So my advice to you is that if you are expressing your unique ideas, to stand behind them with a lot of conviction and to understand that there's no such thing as a starving artist. Like really, if you are creative, if you're willing to put yourself out there, if you're willing to market yourself, these are all also creative skills that are necessary to meet the world where it is right now. So do not be afraid of putting your imprint out in the world.
That is fantastic advice, and I think it's good advice for artists of every age, not just young artists. That's wonderful advice. So, believe it or not, we've come to the end of the hour. It has flown by. I just want to thank both of you. Maybe ask you, could you tell us what is it about independent bookstores that you love, or just what do bookstores mean to you as far as your creativity is concerned?
Christina, that is an excellent question. When I was little and I grew up in Venezuela, my dad not only used to take me to galleries and museums, and I wrote about that, but also he took me to almost every weekend to a bookstore called Ateneo. And it was this incredible basement that was miles and miles of books. And we could really spend 3 hours there, the two of us, right? And like, I would run around. There was a kids section, but there was also an art section, and there was like an history. And it was just like the most fascinating place. When there was a book fair, my dad took me. Then he became friends with a guy who was a distributor. So we spent hours in the distribute. It was like rows and rows and rows of warehouses of books. So for me, independent bookstores are everything, because they bring culture, they bring community, which is something that, you know, you still are doing online. Like Amazon will never be able to do this, right? This
they better not.
will never be able to, because you already have your community, your Miami customers, the people you love. It is a place that,
and
you
they,
know,
and they followed us online.
yeah, it's
been
a
so supportive.
independent bookstores mean the support of the authors who are unknown. Need independent stores, and people who work at independent stores fall in love with books, and they tell other people. And so this is how knowledge is passed. Independent stores are keeping print books alive. This is so important for culture in like every part in the world. We could not have knowledge if it's not for books. So I told you I just wanted to do this with independent bookstores because they mean so much to me.
And I know Maria had made that a point all through her experience with her new book, talking about the independent bookstore. So as you can see, she comes through. I like her believe that independent bookstores, they create culture. They're is the human aspect of commerce. It's places that have personality, and you can see the vision of an individual. Like with anything, like with an artist, they're intimate, they're not clinical, and there's an immediate connection because you know perhaps who owns it. And I think to go through life with experiences like this, just like a small little cafe that you know the owner, it makes all the difference in the world. That's why I support Books and Books and other independent businesses because of that. They are personality, which is exactly what Maria is talking about. It's this kind of places talk about originality. They activate inspiration because it's coming from a source. They're experiences that are human, less than a number, but a human experience.
Yes, and there's a lot of creativity in it at independent bookstores. Tremendous amount. Probably because sometimes there's a lack of resources and there's a necessity to multitask, to invent new ways of doing things, and there's a playfulness too that is not lost, I guess, to commerce. So yeah, so it's magical for sure. So
oh yes.
And this evening has been magical, and I thank you both so much. What a dynamic duo this is. Carlos, do you want to hold the book up? Because I don't have it with me, but you were showing it earlier, and it's a beautiful cover. There we go. How creativity rules the world.
Yes,
So
just get it in the, like, there's the green bar. It benefits Books and Books more than it benefits me. That's the truth. But I want this to continue happening around the States and around the world. I want independent bookstores to continue having these communities, the events for people to go and browse, you know, spend hours. They are magical places with friendly people who love books, who are passionate about authors, ideas. You know, books can change lives. They definitely have changed mine. I have used books for everything, really. I believe in their power. I'm surrounded by books, and this is not even like a tenth of what I have. I have so many books every room in this house. My husband is like, I
we
can't.
love people like you. In fact, our motto is the Jorge Luis Borges, I cannot sleep unless I'm surrounded by books.
Well, I am the same. And I think that, again, we need independent stores to keep operating, to keep bringing this magic, to keep talking about our authors, to keep recommending titles to the customers and to keep people browsing. There's nothing that smells better than a new book, really. It's just magical.
So true.
So get the book from Books and Books, or, tell a friend to go and get it if this, it's not for you, but of course it is for you. That's why you're here. So
and Jill actually just posted, thank you so much. This was fantastic and so inspiring. So thank you, Jill. And thank you to everyone who has joined us tonight. Thanks for being with us. Thanks to Miami Book Fair for their support of this event as well. And I really hope that I'm going to see both of you in person sometime very soon.
We will definitely plan.
I'll meet you at Books and Books.
Absolutely. We will
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you, Maria Cristina. You are amazing. Thank you for
Cristina.
this.
And everybody who stayed here this long, thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I hope you can turn all your ideas into gold.
Thank you. From your lips to God's ears.
Yes, absolutely. Good night.
Bye, everyone.